Greetings, health and happiness to you. I'm Skol, and today we're going to have a great discussion about knife locks. And we have 10 different types of knife locks. Each one of these has a different type of lock. We will discuss each one of them, and we're going to rank them in several different ways. We'll rank from best to worst in strength, reliability, which lock is the safest, ambidextrous, which knife locks are the most fidgety, and also we'll talk about situations, like which knife lock would be best if you were going to the beach in saltwater or on a remote hiking trip. We will talk about several different situations where a different lock would be more choice, and I'm going to move some other knives onto the table just so I remember to talk about these as we go through, because I have a additional point to make when I get to certain knives, and that should be good. So first, let's introduce our 10 knife. Well, actually, first of all, why do you need a lock, or what does a knife lock do for you? And there's 3 things that a knife lock does for you. 1, it keeps it open. So here, this is a Fenrir with a Tic Tac candy-shaped button that presses on a leaf spring. So it's called a top liner lock. So the other type of liner lock, you come in from the bottom. This one is at the top. So this is a top liner lock. So the lock, the leaf spring, presses over behind the heel of the blade, and that's what keeps it open. So number 1, a knife lock keeps a knife open. Number 2, a knife lock system keeps the blade closed. So here it's closed. And the reason it's closed is because the leaf spring's providing pressure, and there's a little detent ball or dimple that goes into a little divot. And when that ball gets pressed into the catch divot with the pressure of the leaf spring, that's what's keeping this closed. That's called the detent. And each one of these, we'll talk about it, how it keeps it closed and open on all of these systems. And the third thing is your knife lock provides some level of safety to have it not swing closed on your fingers. And we'll talk about which ones are the strongest and which ones are the safest. So first up, we'll introduce all 10, starting here with the slip joint. So a slip joint has a back spring, and the back spring provides tension, and you can see that keeps the knife closed. That same tension also keeps the knife open. And then there's also a half stop. So the spring tension and the geometry of the heel is creating a spring tension to keep it in a half stop position. So that is a slip joint. Next up is a button lock. Button lock, I chose this translucent natural G10 material. And don't focus on the brand names of what knives these are. These are just representations of the different lock types, and we're not really talking about a knife brand name in particular. So you can get a button lock in a whole bunch of different type of brand names. But this is translucent material, and you can see this little bit lighter spot here at the tip of my finger, and then a dark spot. So that light spot is where the material's been cut away to make a little well, and that black spot is a little spring that's behind the button. So that spring is pushing that button out with pressure. And then here you can see it's closed. And when I move the blade, you'll see the button pop up and down. So as I move the blade, watch this button and watch it go up and down. Can you see that? There, I see it moving. So it's the spring pressure, and I can feel tension as I move that button. That is providing spring tension on that button, is what's keeping this knife closed. And then when it gets to the open position, that button pops out even further, and this is called a button plunge lock. And there's a little plunge that pops out, and that's what keeps this knife locked open. So we had slip joint, button lock, next up is the crossbar lock. You can see there's spring tension that keeps it closed. There's a U-shaped spring here called an omega spring that puts spring tension on this actuator, the crossbar. And then that spring tension keeps it closed. And then the spring tension pushes the crossbar lock into place to keep it locked open. And that is a crossbar lock. Next up, before we go on, so I had these knives here to remember some points. So here we have a button lock, and here we have a button lock on a side opening auto. So although it's a button actuator, the button lock is only 50% of this mechanism. So if I push the button in, or if it didn't even have a button, there's still a spring that keeps this open. So you'd still have this open just by the spring pressure. So that's significantly different than a regular button lock. Also, when this is closed, this is a latch keeping it locked closed. So when I press that button, it releases the latch, and then the spring takes over and takes it all the way out to deployment. So that's a little bit, or quite a bit, 50% different than a button lock. The button lock is only half of the locking system on a side opening auto. And then we did the crossbar lock. This is just a different type. This one had the omega spring, is most common, but this type of crossbar lock, there's actually a coil spring behind the button, and that coil spring is pushing like that. So instead of an omega spring, there's a coil spring. And that's the only difference on that. So as I make the plane, I'll take them off the table. And we're up to the super lock. Now I narrowed this down to 10 because I didn't see any reason to have there's a super lock, there's a Demco shark lock, which is pretty much the same thing. And he calls his a shark lock because that looks like a fin, or a shark fin. So there's a plunger here that you pull back. That's the super lock, or the shark lock. And Cold Steel also has a similar lock with a plunger, but they call theirs the Atlas lock. So that's 3 different names on basically the same idea of having a plunger on the back that activates the lock. So here, when we talk about fidgetiness, we'll talk about the super lock, but I would include the shark lock and the Atlas lock all in the same representative sample. And I know I saw Metal Complex did like a tier list. He did his video a lot different than I'm doing mine. He did his rankings a lot different. It seemed like his was based mostly on fidgetiness and his personal preferences. But here we're just going to we're going to rearrange in several different orders. We're not trying to get to an aggregate best. We're trying to situationally say what's the best, and we'll come to a lot of good conclusions. But anyway, he had 35 different listings where I had 10. So he actually had shark lock, super lock, Atlas lock listed separately. But then in the end, he had all 3 of those all in the same tier. So, and you can go check out that entertaining video if you like also. So here we're getting off on tangents. We're talking about the super lock, and it's representing other similar locks. And we were talking about, you can watch this plunger move as I move the blade. You'll see it move. If I can keep the knife still enough so you can focus on the plunger, you'll see it move. There, I saw it move. If I go all the way in there, you can start seeing it move. So the spring tension on this plunger is keeping it in the closed position, and then your spring tension on that plunger is keeping it in the open position. And then you pull back on that plunger to release the lock. Now we're up to liner lock. So here on the inside there's a leaf spring, and that when the knife opens, that leaf spring pops over behind the heel of the blade. That's how a liner lock works. And the liner is the metal part on the inside of the scales. And this part of this liner is a leaf spring that pops over. So to release it, you push that over, but the leaf spring is also keeping the knife in the closed position. And the way it does that is with a a little detent ball and a dimple. So the little ball catches into the little divot, the dimple, and that's what's keeping it closed. So that ball is being pushed into a little dimple, and that's what's keeping it closed. So that leaf spring pressure is still keeping this knife closed. And then actually these next three all have a detent. That's how they stay closed. It's just a matter of where the leaf spring is. So this is a representation of a frame lock. It's the same thing. This part right here, that's part of the frame, is a leaf spring. And this is actually my daughter's. In my entire collection, I actually don't have a frame lock, so I borrowed hers just as a representative sample. So here, that is a frame lock with a detent ball that keeps it closed. Here is a Fenrir top liner lock with a Tic Tac candy shaped button actuator. So same thing as the last two, there's a leaf spring. When you get it open, that leaf spring pops open over behind the blade, and that's what keeps it open. And then when you push on this button, it pushes the leaf spring over. You can see it moving. And when you push it over, it releases the knife. And then there's a detent ball, so that leaf spring is pushing the ball into the dimple, and that's what keeps it closed. Next up is the Vosteed banker lock. This is a little bit, or quite a bit, different type of lock. It's also a leaf spring. You can't see it, but in the middle there's a leaf spring, and there's a button right here that's incorporated with the pivot. So some people look at this and they're like, where's the button? It's actually on the pivot. So when you push down on this button, you're pushing the leaf spring back. So we had regular liner lock, we had frame lock, we had top liner lock, and this is like a middle leaf spring that pops up in the middle into a groove. And so when you push the button in, you push that leaf spring out to let it go. And then there's a detent ball is also what keeps this one closed. And number 9, we're up to, have I skipped anything? I did want to talk about this. So this was also another type of top liner lock. I just wanted to mention this one has a round button actuator, but this is still a top liner lock, and this one has the Tic Tac shape. But they work the same way. And then we did banker lock, and that's, the V is for Vosteed, and then anchor, and they put V and anchor together to get Vanker. Here is an OTF out the front type knife, and this has an actuator, plus there's springs inside and there's 2 toggles. So when you put tension on the spring, it fires out, and then the toggle flips and locks it. And then when you put tension on it back the other way, the toggle flips and locks it the other way, and now it's locked in the closed position. That's not going to fall out unless you do the actuator. And the last representative type here is a back lock, and this has a back spring, and you can see the spring tension from that back spring is what keeps this in the closed position. And then when you bring it up and you see the spring lifting, and there's a little catch on the end here, that's going to fall down in. This is called a triad lock, which is the top strongest type of lock, and it's actuated in the middle of the frame, so it's a mid-frame actuator back lock. And then here's another back lock where the actuator is more towards the back, and some other types of back locks, it can be even further, like all the way back on the heel. So I just wanted to mention that. All of them are represented by the same one. And I'm also going to have this be representative of the scorpion lock, and an authentic Italian stiletto also has a back spring with a catch up here. So when you open this, this catches down, and that's the same way a scorpion lock works. So the only difference between a back lock and a scorpion lock, they both have a spring, and this is called a pick lock on a stiletto. You have to lift here. You put your 2 thumbs and you lift. That's how you unlock an old school Italian stiletto. And with the scorpion lock, you're also lifting from the front. So when the knife is open, there's a catch up here, and you're lifting it off of the catch. And the only difference here is there's a pivot. So when I think that's the pivot there. When I press here, it rotates on that pivot and lifts the catch. But on a scorpion lock, you're lifting from the front to lift the back spring off of the catch. But it's the same thing. It's a back spring tension with a catch up front. So there we go. We've introduced our 10 candidates that we will rearrange in different orders. And I did have 2 other mentions. So like I said previously, this panorama represents about 95% or more of the entire knife lock types, but there are a few others. There's this is a open L, and it's got a collar lock, so you can actually lock it into the closed position. Remember we mentioned each type of lock keeps it closed. So here it's locked closed, and when I spin the collar here, now the groove is lined up and I can open it. And then to lock it out, you can spin the collar, and now that can't move. So that's pretty strong, but I'm not going to. This is such a only one unique type of knife that uses a collar lock. So I just wanted to mention there are other types of locks. And okay, we're ready to move on to rearranging these knives. Which one is the strongest type of lock? And spoiler alert, they're already in order for the first arrangement strength. So I mentioned the open L is another type, and I did want to mention there is another type I wanted to mention. There's a type of lock like the CJRB Tundra where you can open your knife and then insert an additional pin, and that can give additional strength. But I think it's an extra hassle to have to do an extra step of inserting a pin. So I'm not including that in the strength arrangement, but actually that probably would be the strongest if you do that extra step of inserting an additional pin that prevents the knife from being able to fold at all until you pull that pin out. And the last point is a fixed blade, which has no moving parts, would be stronger than any, probably even stronger than the triad lock, which can hold 500 pounds. Could this piece of metal hold 500 pounds weight laterally or horizontally on that bar of metal? Probably could. So strength, let's start with the strongest, back lock. So you have this big, sturdy back lock system, and then the triad lock has been tested and proven in cold steel videos. They say we're the strongest as part of their marketing thing, kind of overkill, 500 pounds, over 500 pounds pressure, and this lock type can withstand that. But back locks in general and the scorpion lock are the strongest with that type of system. Next up is the OTF, and I'm going to try to give points of why I put these in certain orders. So an OTF knife has a lock, and I've seen, this is a Microtech Ultratech, I've seen this type of knife be hammered into a tree. So someone took a hammer and hammered it into a tree, and that was able to do that, be hammered into a tree like a nail. But it did damage the thing, but it didn't cause the lock to fail. But what it did do is it bent some internal mechanisms, and the actuator no longer worked. So it was stuck in the open position. It wouldn't work anymore. So that kind of pressure overuse, you're never going to use this as a nail. But that kind of proves it can stay locked out if you were putting that kind of pressure to stab. So I'm ranking that one second. Also, lateral pressure. All the rest of these types of knives, you're worried about it closing on your fingers. But this actually only goes in and out. There's no swing to it. So that's another reason why I'm ranking it so high. So if this lock breaks or fails, it's still not going to swing on your fingers. So that's why I rank the strength so high. Vanker lock, the reason it's higher than all these other leaf spring, I rank it at the top, is because when that leaf spring pushes up into the middle groove, it's actually locking out on 3 different sides. The regular leaf and frame lock, they only lock one side of the heel. The top liner lock usually goes into like a 90-degree angle and locks out 2 sides of the heel. And then this one in the middle ends up locking out 3 sides of the heel of the knife. So that's why I rank that as a bank vault next highest strength of a lock. And like I just mentioned, a top liner lock, there tends to be a 90-degree curve, and this top liner lock falls into that and locks it out horizontally or vertically and horizontally into a 90-degree spot. And then your frame lock, the reason, since it works the same as a liner lock, but the reason I rank it higher is because the frame locks usually have a thicker piece of metal, and that's the only reason. Works the same way, it just presses behind the heel, but because it's a thicker piece of metal usually on a frame lock, that's why I rank it a little bit higher than the liner lock. And like I mentioned, I don't have any frame locks. I prefer not to have part of the frame be part of the lock. Some people are that way, I'm that way. So I don't have any frame locks aesthetically. I don't like how it changes the look of the side when the frame bends in. But I'm willing to put my personal bias aside, and I will say that is probably stronger than a regular internal leaf spring just because it's usually thicker. Next up is the regular liner lock. So when you, I'm not sure I did that all the way. So a liner lock, the liner is on the inside of the scale, and then it goes behind the heel. That's how a liner lock works. I kind of started with the liner lock being the average in the middle, and that's kind of where I started when I was working out why would one be stronger than the other. I decided a liner lock is probably middle of the road, and then is this stronger? And I said yes. Is this even stronger? Yes. So that's kind of how I rank these by strength. Now we're going to some spring actuated. So there's a spring tension, and then this gets pushed up into a groove. It's somewhat similar to a banker lock, where the lock gets pushed into a groove and locks out, at least in 2 different directions. The reason I ranked the spring tension ones is because you'll see spine whack tests, you can get springs to bounce. So if you do a hard enough shock, you can get these springs on all of these spring ones to bounce and become unlatched. So under normal use, these are fine. All of these are fine. But what's the strongest? Because spring locks tend to bounce, and you can get them to unengage more easily than the others. That's why I ranked the strength lower. So same thing, I've seen, especially the Vision FG, this is the Vision FG. The Buster FG has the exact same type of super lock, but it's a bigger, heavier blade, and that one actually got a reputation. If you give it a good hard whack out towards the tip, that one tends to disengage more often. So one thing I wanted to say while we were talking about strength is the bigger the blade, the more important it is to have one of the more reliable locks, because while this one won't disengage as much as the Vision FG, is partially because it's not as big of a blade. So it's a little bit directly proportional there. I've also seen videos where you can get crossbar locks to disengage by whacking on the spine. So, but what is more, I mean, these are pretty similar. How could you rank them pretty similar? Which one's higher? They're both pretty similar, but I think a coil spring can be more sturdy than an omega spring. That's why they're very close, but that's why I put the omega spring lower. And then next up is the plunge lock. This one has the least amount of lock material and such a small, usually just to have it fit behind this button, the spring is so small. And these can also disengage. I saw Neves with a button lock. He even with one of the high brands, he gave it a few whacks in it, disengaged pretty easily. And these were a rage about a year ago. Currently it's December 2025, but button locks kind of went through a rage or popularity. But then there was a sudden 180 reversal in the market because the top liner locks came out, and it actuates the same way with pushing a button, but you've got the leaf spring, which is better than the plunge, and that little spring on the button lock. Now you replace that with a big leaf spring. So everybody has shifted to wanting this, and this is the rage now, and these might even go nearly completely out. The demand has dropped out for button locks. Major shift in the market over the last year. And then lastly, we have the old school slip joint. So you've got a spring, and there's no particular actuator. It all relies on the spring tension. So you have spring tension, you do have a half stop, so that acts like a safety. And then when it's in the open position, there's quite a large amount of spring tension that keeps it in that. But even if it was whacked, most likely the half stop would catch it. But even though this is being ranked as the lowest on the strength ranking, when we rank these in other orders, you'll see that the slip joint will do better being near the top in some of these other rankings that we're going to do. And does the slip joint still have value today? Well, in a separate video, because we don't want this one to go too long, I'm going to debate that over 90% of all the EDC tasks in history have been performed by slip joints, and that they still are relevant and can still do at least 90% of today's EDC tasks. Also, we'll do the debate later. When I do a separate video about slip joints, you can come back later and find that when I get that video up. But one of the other points about slip joints is they tend to have more natural materials and tend to be more beautiful pieces of artwork as well. So there is value in slip joints, and we're going to include these in the rankings today. Another point about strength is the smaller the blade, the less important a lock is. So like here's a keychain lock, or a keychain blade, very small. Nobody would even think that this needs a lock because of the blade size. Nobody is afraid of this. There is a little bit of a spring tension. When I get it there, it springs, but it doesn't have a half stop. And there is a little bit of spring tension that keeps it closed. So that's all you need on a little keychain blade like this. This is a Swiss Tech. So you don't need a blade lock. The smaller a blade is, the less relevant it is. And slip joints tend to be in a smaller sweet spot. They're usually smaller. So the sweet spot is kind of 2.5 to 3 inches long for a slip joint, but then your regular EDC market is about 3 inches to 3.5. So the window of the sweet spot is a little bit bigger, so you do want a lock, and a more reliable lock the bigger your blade gets. And we're talking about strength, so when you get to super big blades, like something like this, you can see it's got a back lock. When you get to oversized blades, way above the sweet spot, Cold Steel has figured it out that when you have the bigger, longer blades, you want a back lock. So the bigger the blade, the more sturdy you want, and you want the strongest type of lock when you get that big. Spyderco also has that figured out. So a lot of their bigger blades, here's a 4-inch blade. This is a Native Chief, and it's got a back lock. And then your big, hefty, tough knives from Cold Steel. So Cold Steel, Spyderco, they have a lot of backlock models for tough use. And even when you get a cheapo knife with having a back spring and a back lock, I'd automatically guess that this lock is actually stronger than a lot of these other types of locks. But that doesn't mean all of these are acceptable for EDC, but when we get to situational, we'll talk about when you want to select certain lock types for situations. I think I made all my points about ranking in strength order. Let me know if in the comments if you disagree. I tried to put my personal biases aside when I rank these in order from strongest to weakest type of locks. And maybe you agree that I got it all right, but if you have a disagreement, let me know in the comments. And next we will rearrange these based on reliability. So what is the most reliable type of lock? Now, reliability can mean, does it stay locked, or does it bounce out when you whack it on the spine? That's not a reliable lock. Or it can mean, will the spring break? So like Omega springs in particular, compared to the other spring ones, some people say that they break the Omega springs. It's never happened to me. And I do have a crossbar lock that has Omega springs. This is a Benchmade North Fork, and if you saw my video about 1,000 days of carry, 1K carry club, I've carried this in my pocket for over 1,000 different days, and I never had a problem with the spring. So these are good for EDC, and you may never have one break, but some people said they break. But when we're talking about reliability, I'd probably move the Omega spring, just from what I've heard, towards the bottom for reliability. These also have springs. I've never heard of springs breaking. These seem to last a long time. I also have another OTF that's in my 1,000 carry club, and this still is firing. It's been carried 1,000 times with zero maintenance, and it's still firing. So I haven't had any experience, even with extensive carry. How many people carry the same knife for over 1,000 times, different days in their pocket? So these stand up to EDC use, including the crossbar lock. Even if I put this all the way at the bottom for reliability, it still has value as an EDC, because I've carried a crossbar lock extensively and it held up. I've carried an OTF extensively for over 1,000 days and it held up. So are there any of these that are unacceptable reliability for EDC, normal use in your pocket every day in normal circumstances? I think all the lock types are value. I do see the button lock. We'll talk about a certain situation where the springs are not good for other situations. Which one of these is most likely to disengage? Probably the plunge lock. So I put these two at the bottom. Reliability. Does the slip joint belong at the bottom when there's no lock to wear out and that back spring will last forever? Reliability, this is probably near the top, if not at the top. So we got springs that can break, sometimes break for people. Springs wear out. If you actuate that, how many times does what's the thing that's most likely to wear out after you've actuated it 10,000 times? It's probably that little spring. So let's rearrange these a little bit. Let's try to do a little bit quicker. I'll put slip joint up here. These are pretty close. This is a back spring. And this is a back spring. Those will last forever. I'll put those together near the top. I'll say springs eventually will wear out, so I'm going to move the springs towards the bottom. Now I have heard of the material eventually wearing off on the tips, and some types of frame locks will actually have 2 screws and a piece of material that you can remove and replace. So I'm going to put that a little bit lower on reliability than the other leaf springs. And I'm going to put, and these are all kind of the same thing. They're all leaf springs, so maybe they're all grouped together. I'd put leaf springs here, back springs here, and coil springs and wire spring. These are all coil springs. I'll put those in a grouping here, and omega spring I'll put there. I'm recording, but Ethan's bringing our dog Saber in. Come on, Saber. You can come in. Just let his leash go. Oh, he's already good to go. Okay, I'll keep going. I'm just doing this in one take. I'm not editing. That was reliability. I think that makes sense. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Kind of grouped them all together. And from what we've heard from Real Juice, or what I've heard, it makes sense to me that back springs are the most reliable. Now let's talk about what are the safest type of locks. So there's a terminology called finger safe travel. So something like the OTF actuator, your fingers are never in the way of the blade. So I can do this 10,000 times and there's no chance of me getting cut. That is actually the safest type of lock. So I'm going to put it all the way up here at the top. And then I mentioned David C. Anderson came up with the terminology about finger safe travel. So he likes crossbar locks. He made his maximal model with the crossbar lock. So when you do the crossbar lock, you can swing it closed, you can fidget with it, and your hands can never be in the way of the blade. So that is a finger safe travel. So we're going to put that up near the top. Same thing with the super lock. So a lot of these get their popularity because of their fidgetiness, and we'll get to fidgetiness. But here's another finger safe travel. You can do that all day. So I'm going to group those together. Those are pretty close. Same thing with button lock. One reason they became so popular is because they're so easy to actuate just like the others. And it's also finger safe travel. And then you've got more button locks. These are leaf springs, but they also are a button. So here's the pivot button. Same thing, you can do a button. And I'm going to group all those together. Finger safe travel, we're talking about safety. So finger safe travel, OTF was the most safe. This group, finger safe travel. Here you've got your compression button on the top liner lock. I'm calling that the tic-tac shape button. So you can do all day, you can work it just like a button lock. Now we get into other types of locks where you can have to get your finger in the way. So here I have to reach in. Now if I was doing it like this or trying to use my thumb, I could undo the liner lock and it could swing down on me. So now it's no longer finger safe travel like these were. So that's a liner lock, same thing, works pretty much the same way. You move it over, but you got to get your finger in the travel path of the blade. And then you've got your two-handed openers. You can backlocks. So to do a backlock, usually some of them you have to bear down harder, but you have to put your hands there. And if I did that and you had good action, it can swing down on your fingers. So it's safest usually just to keep control of your blade if you want to do it 100% safe, which is actually what I do pretty much with backlocks. I always keep two hands on it, and I think I can still say I've never cut myself closing any type of knife. So I mean, if you're careful and you are diligent, not negligent, you can make all of these knife types safe. Just keep your hands out of the path of travel, but we will say that is a little bit harder to not cut yourself. Now we were including the scorpion lock in this category. So the scorpion lock is a little bit more fidgety. You can one-handed kind of hold it and lift the scorpion lock and make it fall. Some people, Metal Complex was talking about scorpion lock, and the way he was doing it, he seemed to think that he was scared of it. So it must have been the way he was holding it. I'm not sure, but he was afraid of the big blade seemed to come down towards his hands. So I don't know. I don't have one, but I've seen it demonstrated. But whether it's the scorpion lock or this one, it's towards the bottom of the list. And then you got your slip joint. So slip joints are safe, but you do have to make sure you get your fingers out of the way. That's one of the steps. So when you're closing a slip joint, sometimes there's not a half lock, but you just want to make sure and keep control of the blade and the handle together. Bring it halfway and then bring it down till you have the tension, then make sure your fingers are out of the way and you can let it spring shut. You can do it safely. People have been doing that for hundreds of years. But is it safer than the ones where you never have your hand in the way of the blade? Because people have cut themselves closing knives. Often it's because they release the lock and it swings down on their fingers. But if you're careful, all these are safe. But kind of lining them up from safest to least safe, I'd go with something like this. So what do you think about that? And I'm not trying to insert my personal bias at all. I'm just saying how it operates. I think it makes sense. Finger safe travel. This one is the safest. Now what if you had your hand in the way when you fired? I demonstrated in my video when you fire into a flimsy napkin, it won't even go through a flimsy napkin. There's not a lot of power behind that fire, but just keep your hand or your body away from the front, and that is never a problem. And just holding it one-handed, that's the safest. Okay, now we'll talk about ambidextrous. Which ones are ambidextrous? And for my definition, I'm saying two-handed is not ambidextrous. Ambidextrous is when you can hold it in one hand and actuate, and you can equally do the same thing on your other hand, one hand and actuate. That would be an ambidextrous design. So two-handed, this requires two hands. That's not ambidextrous, and there's really going to be only two categories. Not ambidextrous, two hands. Now, liner locks, you can actually get left-handed versions where they put the leaf spring on the other side, and then if you have your clip can be moved to the other side, that can make it a left-handed version, but this is a right-handed version liner lock, so this is not ambidextrous. And I'm going to say not ambidextrous is or not one-handed. Ambidextrous is even less ambidextrous than a two-hand, is what I'll say. Same thing with the frame lock. This is a right-handed frame lock, so it's not ambidextrous. This has the button on one side, so not ambidextrous. This also has the button on one side, so it's not ambidextrous. The button is on one side, not ambidextrous. But then you get up to the super lock, and you can move that clip to the other side, and then this is finally, we found one that is ambidextrous. With your left hand or your right hand, you have the same equal access to the plunger, and you can move that clip if you want to the other side to make it left-handed. So this can be fully left-handed by just moving the clip. You have access to this is ambidextrous. Same thing with the crossbar lock. You can move the clip to the other side, and then if you have the thumb studs on both sides, you have equal access to the crossbar on both sides. So this can be done left-handed. I'm not left-handed, but I can do it left-handed. Just I have same access to the lock mechanism. So that is ambidextrous. That's something that's got going for it. I know there's a channel called Lefty EDC. He talks about left-handed knives, and he's kind of cornered the market. All the lefties follow him, which is about 10% of the population. And then he's got his Devo knife brand that he works with, and they always make a 10% of their inventory when they come out with Devos. They make a left-handed version. So people that are lefties that follow Lefty, the left-handed Devos always sell out a little bit faster than the right-handed, just because there's a bigger left-handed following, and when they get the chance to get a left-handed liner lock, they'll jump on that. So here we had ambidextrous. Now this, I think this is reversible, so you take this out and you can flip it to the other side and screw that back in. So that would make this ambidextrous. So I can do that left-handed. That takes some manpower to actuate these, manpower tension. So here we got ambidextrous. So we had a few that were nicely ambidextrous, and most were not ambidextrous. Although two-handed, you could say I can do that left-handed, same as right-handed, the same, but still it's two-handed. And that's why, and I'm saying that's, I'll put it in the middle. Let's just make another category. Back locks and slip joints, we'll put them in the middle. They're not ambidextrous, but they're not specifically towards one hand like these others are. So all of these are all specifically right-handed. These are specifically two-handed, and these are fully ambidextrous, left or right. So there, that makes sense. Ranking, who's going to have any disagreement with that? I think that covers it about ambidextrous lock types. Okay, fidgety. Fidgety is the fun category. Which one of these knives are most fidgety? So here you can do that all day. That's always fun. Now, one reason people fidget is because in your brain you get a little dopamine hit every time you successfully flip a knife open. You can give yourself a little dopamine hit. Your brain produces a little bit of dopamine every time you do that. So that's why people fidget, and they get addicted to it. So that's fidgety, turning these into toys. Fidget toys, that's a thing. That's a big thing in the knife market. The Vision FG, this is pretty fidgety, and the action is so smooth. That's why this was Knife of the Year territory when it came out, and this has been a pretty big mega hit. I'll put it there. Next, crossbar locks are very fidgety, and you can do the thumb stud or the crossbar lock. So these are also very fidgety. So you see that your spring locks, where did they make hay? They make hay in fidgetiness. So they're not going away. There's a purpose for those types of locks. Then you got your button locks, assuming that you're right-handed and have the right-handed button, or if you're left-handed and have it the way you want. Actuating these buttons is very fidgety. So button locks, I'm going to put high, all of the button locks. Now we're talking about lock types in this video which types of lock types are the most fidgety. But this particular brand, I can open it 7 different ways. So front flipper, normal back flipper, press the lock, swing it open. I can do a thumb flick. I can do a spidey flick. I can open it 2 hands, or I can even wrist flick it open. So you can 7 different ways to open it. But as far as just lock type, how fidgety is the lock type? We're talking about a button lock. So button locks are fidgety. These are extra fidgety, most fidgety. And then I'm going to say back locks are the least fidgety. When you have to do 2 hands, you're not getting a whole lot of fidget out of that. And kind of same thing with liner locks. You can do liner locks. Now I understand the scorpion lock is a little bit more fidgety. So if I was categorizing and separating scorpion lock, it would be a little bit higher on this list somewhere. Now, liner locks, you can do it one-handed, or you can safely do it 2-handed. It's less fidgety than these. I mean, you can do this over and over. You can flip it and then do that. You can get fidget out of it, and that's a little bit faster than doing a back lock 2-hand, but definitely not as fidgety as these others. So that's middle of the road. Button locks are higher. These are about the same. And then you get your, I'm going to say that slip joints are a little bit more fidgety than back locks. And that's because of the spring tension. You can get a dopamine hit out of a slip joint. And this is the thing in the slip joint community. They'll open it that far, half the spring tension. And then when they finish the opening with their finger, you get a little satisfying dopamine hit when you do that. It's always satisfying to get that last little lockout. Same thing with the closing. When you let that go, you get that satisfying spring. You get a little dopamine hit, and that can be fidgety too with your walk and talk. So that's a slip joint thing, but you can get addicted and enjoy doing your walk and talk as a fidget thing as well. So I'm going to rate that a little bit higher. I might even rate it higher than liner locks possibly. So there you go. Fidgetiness. Button locks. I'm going to put these 3 are button locks. There's my ranking. Trying not to be biased about which one I like the most. Just on how easy it is to fidget with it. And I think that's the ranking right there. So let me know if you agree or disagree, if you'd rank something higher. But there is the ranking of most fidgety to least fidgety for knife lock types. Now let's talk about situations. Which type of lock would you take to the beach? So we're talking specifically about the locks. And I'm going to say when you go to saltwater, how well will these locks stand up to getting grit of sand from the beach and salt water. And if you let the salt water dry, it's going to leave residue and salt residue, getting that interaction. So there's other factors to consider about your action. I wouldn't take any ball bearing skiff type knives to the beach. I wouldn't take any springs. And I do know a story from someone who went to the beach last year and took a button lock. And their little button lock, I showed you where this little spring is. That little well got filled with water on his button lock, and it rusted out. That just filled with rust. That little spring in there rusted, and then it was all crunch. When he would press the button, it was crunch, 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 rusted out. So don't take a little coil spring or an omega spring to the beach. That's the first thing that's going to rust. Especially if you leave a bead of water in there, you can get rust. A little bead of salt water in there for 2 days, and you can get your little spring rusted out. So situational, what lock types are better? I'm going to say we're talking about the beach first and saltwater. I'm going to put all these coil springs down at the bottom. I'm going to put the banker lock a little bit lower just because I know there's a well in there where how easy can you get the water when that fills up with water? You dunk it in salt water, or you get grit down if it got in that well. You'd have to do maintenance. You need to take it apart. Also, I'm pretty sure this has bearings, but we're not talking about bearings. We're talking about locks. And so I'm going to rank this lower as well. Back locks. This is going to work. Also, if you have washers, that's better. Back locks tend to have washers. All these spring locks tend to have bearings because they're more for fidgety. You want it to glide smooth for fidgetiness, so you're going to have bearings. They almost go together. So spring locks are going to be lower. Leaf springs are going to be higher. Do you want water and grit getting down into this? No, I'm going to actually move this all the way to the bottom. That's the worst for the beach. You want salt water down there and saltwater dried residue. Do you want to have to do maintenance on this type of knife, which is particularly difficult to take apart and put back together? So we got back locks. Slip joints are almost the exact same thing. They have washers, usually always have washers on a back lock. And there's so little mechanism to just have a spring and maybe a pivot. Easy to clean, get in there and clean. Those are the best for the beach and saltwater. Now, if we're talking saltwater, maybe fixed blade, coated, and a handle material that won't react at all with salt water, and there's nothing for salt grit to get into. So here's a seal pup. The actual Navy SEALs often use this type of knife, and it used to be standard issue years ago. So here's the Navy SEALs, the top saltwater military unit, but also sea, air, and land, top military unit overall. If you want to go to the beach, maybe you want a fixed blade that has a coating and a stainless steel, good stainless steel, and a handle that won't react with water or sand. So there you go. Best for the beach, something like that. Although beaches tend to be in more liberal areas, which also might be harder to carry. So we're getting off track here. We were talking about which one would be best situational for the beach. We talked about washers, but we're trying to focus mainly on the locking mechanism. So here, these are all leaf springs. I'm going to put leaf springs higher or next. I'm going to put them all together. Some flipper, they've gone to bearings. So when you focus on the lock type, I think leaf springs, back springs, then leaf springs. But then you also have to pay attention to bearings, because that's an important thing. So here I've got this all grouped together. Here's your coil springs and omega wire springs. Here's your OTF. That's the worst to take to the beach. Leaf springs and back springs. There's the order. Let me know if you agree. That's a situation of going to the beach or grit. Getting grit into bearings, which are more common with spring knives. So salt, grit, maybe the desert. Can you carry something like this around in Arizona as EDC? Probably. But how much are you getting into off the road, into the grit, into the arid grit, where the road runners and Joshua trees are? If you're getting down into the dirt, I'd probably recommend something that doesn't have bearings where the grit can get down into. So salt and grit, saltwater and sand. I think this is the order. You want little sand grit getting in there? No. Next, so when we're talking about situations, and maybe you're going to the city and there's a knife law, your knife has to be under 3 inches. That's common in some of the big cities. So when you're going places, just think about your situation, and you're going to select a different knife sometimes. So you're going to a city that has a city knife law, you'll pick a certain size blade, and then depending on where you're going, like we just said, the beach with salt water, which is the most corrosive. And I actually do have an example to bring up. I just saw recently, the video's been out there a while, but Ben Peterson of NAFS, had a side channel for a while called Ben Banters, so you can go find that. It's still out there. I watched a video where he had a meetup and invited people to come swimming in the Salt Lake with him, and they had about 14 people show up, they said. And one guy went out, he had a Lander 1. They were out swimming, and then he holds up his Lander 1 and shows it to Ben. Look, I've got my Lander 1 S35E, I think it was. And he's out there in the Brine Lake, which is even saltier than the ocean. And the first thing Ben said is, "Did you mean to bring that out here?" So he didn't say what he was thinking, but getting that salt water into the bearings on the Lander 1 is not good. That's got Omega spring, because it's a crossbar lock on the Lander 1. You don't want salt water on that. You're definitely going to have to do maintenance on that knife after dunking it in brine. Brine is when water is fully saturated with salt. So the saltiest lake in all of America, that's the Great Salt Lake in Utah. You don't want to bring any of these spring knives into the salt water. And then that guy that dunked his Lander 1, he probably wants to take that apart, dry it out real good, put fresh oil on it, and hopefully it's not been ruined. If he does quick maintenance, he might be able to save it. So part of doing videos like this is helping you think of situations. You're going to pick different knives for different situations. Now let's talk about remoteness. Maybe you're going on a backpacking trip or camping out remote. If your knife breaks, you can't just go get another one out of your collection. You've selected a knife to go to a remote area. Maybe you're on foot hiking and camping overnight. Do you want something that has the possibility to break, like one of these springs? It does happen. The Omega spring is broken for some people. Are you more likely to get moisture out? What if it's a downpour? Do you want moisture in your bearings? Do you want moisture on your springs? You don't. This has a cavity with a spring in case there. What if water gets in there and rusts out the spring? So if you're going to a remote area, I'd recommend not the fidget knives, not the spring. I think it would be a better choice to get a liner lock or a back lock. Now, also on your situation of your remoteness, are you going to make some tinder? You want something a little tougher? And we've talked about what's the strongest. So what was the strongest? It's also these back springs. So remoteness, moisture. What about a canoe trip? So you're just going out for a few hours. You're going to do a canoe. That's moisture considerations. You don't want to get these dunked in moisture. You don't want to fill this up with water. So this ranking is almost the same here. I don't have to move things. You don't want to get water in your bearings. The ones that have washers can withstand that. So here's the knife I've been taking on canoe trips for years. This has gone several times. It's a Bird model, cheaper, from Spyderco. Spyderco, that's their lower budget line. So I got a budget stainless. We have a FRN handle that's not going to react with water, and this is still fine. It's got washers, not bearings, and it's a backlock. So I'm kind of glad I made a good choice back then of which one's going to be my canoe trip knife, and I think that I chose wisely. Even on further review, really thinking about it in situations, I think I made a good choice a long time ago of which one. And this has been dunked in the river water, and it's fine. And I know I rinsed it off and dried it off, but I never took it apart or had to do maintenance, and it's still good. Also, if you dropped it in the the river and you lost it, it's a cheaper one too. So I was taking it into a certain environment, and I made a good choice. But I did recently get a salt version. So we were talking about go to the beach. What can take it? So here's a backlock. Remember we said backlocks were probably the top best for going to the beach, and a higher stainless steel. If this had a coating, it would be even better. But you can see that they did coat the hardware, and that gives it more resistance against the salt. So even Larry Thomas, that invented MagnaCut, says you can put MagnaCut in salt water exposure for 2 days and you can start getting rust. So this is at almost the very top of corrosion resistance. There's a few steel types that are a little bit higher, like Vanex is a 10 out of 10 for corrosion resistance, and MagnaCut, it was either a 9 or a 9.5, so pretty close, high corrosion resistance, but salt water is just so corrosive. So this is my beach knife. I got it pre-Christmas on a good sale deal, and salt version, I've been having my eye on getting a salt for a while, so I did want to mention that. I remembered to talk about this one when I was talking about a canoe trip. So I'd probably still take this one on a canoe trip, but I do have an even more water resistant one in the salt version, and that's MagnaCut, which is pretty nice. I also went with serrated, fully serrated. I figured when is it most critical to cut something fast? What if you're drowning or snagged or you need to cut a rope? When would it be the most emergency? I think there's a higher emergency factor if you're in a car that's on fire, or so you want a rescue knife to be serrated. And also same thing if you're in water and there's a risk of drowning, you want to cut fast to get free. Serrations are the best. They do cut faster. And I won't use this very much because I don't go to the beach very much. I live in Ohio now. When I was in the military, we were stationed in LA, and we were also stationed on the coast in Virginia. So we got a lot of beach time then, but now we're in Ohio. How often do we actually go to the beach? So I don't think I'll need to resharpen this, if ever. But I have a beach knife now, Spyderco Salt Series. Other situations, so moisture, remoteness. What about self-defense? Are you going to pick a certain lock type for self-defense? This is actually the last topic, so we're almost done. Situationally, which one is best for self-defense? You want a fidget knife, or you want a strong knife, or maybe the best combo of the both? So if you remember, now, before I finish ranking all these, you don't ever want to be in a knife fight. You probably did something not smart yourself to get in the situation where now you're in a knife fight or need a knife for self-defense. But because you can avoid going you don't need to go to the dangerous area. Or what if you can't help it? Well, you could move. If you're in an area of a lot higher risk to need a knife for self-defense, if you can move, maybe that's a good idea. But it's also good to stand your ground. So if you find yourself someday in a knife fight, I've watched, I have taken self-defense classes, and that's the top self-defense tip they gave you in the one self-defense class is to not even be in the situation. You don't have to go in the dark alley. If you can avoid altogether the situation where you need to have self-defense, that is actually the best self-defense. But you also want to be an American that's able to go safely to activities. So things happen. So let's move on and say now you found yourself in a self-defense situation. Some knife experts will say both people get stabbed if you're fighting with a knife. So that doesn't sound very good. But I did hear one good strategy. If you have a larger knife with longer reach and quick deployment. So I was starting to get to that point. You want something that can deploy quick and reliably and be strong for a pocket knife that is for self-defense. I'd probably say this is the best. Highest lock strength and quick deployment. Watch how I can just swing this open. So usually backlocks are less fidgety, but because this has so much heavy blade, and if I give it a swing, it's going to swing open. It didn't go. I wasn't doing it full power because I didn't want to hit the tripod. But if I just give it a real good flick, I can just flip it open like that. So this is quick deployment under circumstances where I'm not trying to avoid hitting the tripod. If I had a wider swing area, I could easily swing that open. Now, and then if I choke back on such a big handle, we're not doing a self-defense video here. We're just talking about the situation of self-defense, which lock would be best, which fidget type lock would be best for fast deployment. So the strategy that sounds pretty good is the other guy, he's going to hold his knife out in front of him, so the closest part of him is his hand with his knife. So that's actually the target, is his hand. And if you've got a longer reach, you have an advantage. And if you can, with this 5.5-inch blade, hit his hand or wrist, you're keeping yourself further back. You're aiming for his hand that is closest to you. If you hit him there, the knife fight might be over, because he would get a huge gash. He would get a 5-inch rip in his arm. He might not want to fight anymore. So you might have won that knife fight if you had something like this. But how many models can you just flip open that's a backlock, which was the strongest? And if you remember the strength test, or the strength ranking, we had next highest after the backlock was the OTF with the actuator. So this is fast deployment and strong if you have one of these Microtechs. Now if you have some cheapo brand, I don't know if your lock is as good, but I've seen this nailed into a tree, so that gives me trust from seeing that video that this would work. Fast deployment and a big enough blade to matter, this would be a pretty good choice. John Wick, probably, even though it's fictional, knows what he's doing. This is what he carried in the first movie. He had a Microtech Ultratech. He had a black one. And then in the second movie, he had a Microtech Troodon, so a little bit bigger. Bigger is better in a knife fight. Longer reach and choke back a little bit. Now, I caution you should do a little training. Don't just say, oh, I saw this video. This is a good self-defense knife. None of these pocket knives have a good guard. So if you've ever hit something and the sudden stop when the knife hits something hard, your hand could slide forward, and that'll take you by surprise if you've never practiced. So you do need to practice that. Take something safe and jab it into something and see how that sudden stop, and do you have the hand strength to hold on to the handle. Also, this is pretty slick, and if you get blood on it, it's even more slick. It'll be one of the slickest things ever if this had wet blood on it. So we're not talking about actual self-defense here, but we're talking about which knife type, lock type would deploy fast and be strong. So this is a good choice right here. Is there any other lock types that would be good for self-defense? All the rest are kind of meh. They can be fast to deploy and you got a knife, but would these hold up under torsional stresses? I think the OTF and the backlocks are your best choice. Would a leaf spring, if you're given a torsional twist, or what if he whacks during the fight, or a melee, whack the spine on your blade. You want the stuff that's going to hold up strongest in a melee. So really, I'd only recommend backlock and OTF. Next, and then we'll just rank them all. Leaf springs would probably be the next. I like the Vanker lock because it's a middle, locked up on 3 sides. And then your top liner lock, and then these would be about the same. And then all your fidget ones, I'd probably say that's the ranking for self-defense. Also, bigger is better, and slip joints tend to be smaller, so I'd put that at the bottom in the self-defense category. I have covered everything on my sticky. I think I've actually taken a good enough take here to call it, so I'm going to post this video. We tried to chew it down to the bone, the topic of lock types, and we rearranged these knives in several different orders, and I think you'll get something useful to think about your situation and which lock type you're going to select for that situation. So that's about it. I hit all my points. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed the video. Watch it again. Like and subscribe. Share it. I think a lot of info here would be good for some people, like that guy that took his knife out into the salt. Could have saved his knife. Maybe he didn't even clean it and ruined his knife. You can gain knowledge and make a different decision, and I think I gave you some stuff to think about. So let me know if you disagree with anything in the comments. I always try to respond to comments. I appreciate if you subscribe. I'm trying to get this channel going, and I actually do have like endless content I can do. I have pretty big knife collection. Haven't even done any fixed blades yet, but I'll start doing some fixed blades too and other things. But I'm having fun doing this. I like thinking about it. I like doing my homework. I like presenting the info. One thing you'll get if you watch some of my other videos, you can kind of notice that I do my homework and try to make some good points. So I'm Skol. Thanks for stopping by. And remember, always carry a knife.